This is my experience using GrapheneOS for 1 year. Now, whenever it comes to the features of GrapheneOS, there's a lot. So, for the sake of not destroying this video's runtime, I'm just going to try and paraphrase as many features as I can. But I would recommend you check out their actual website and actually read things for yourself. But this video would be like well over an hour long if I just talked about the features alone. First feature is the one that takes the longest to explain, which is defending against exploitation of unknown vulnerabilities. This one is probably one of the most important and the most in-depth, but I'm going to try and break it down to make it simple. So first of all, this is a feature that can defend against 0 days, which is pretty much an attack that developers don't know how to patch yet. The first line of defense is attack surface reduction, which is removing unnecessary code that could be potentially harmful. But at the same time, they do leave a lot in for functionality, so you're not really losing anything. The next line of defense is using languages and tools that are able to avoid bugs. This is good as many exploits involve different kinds of bugs and crashes or memory leaks. So they basically try to make it so that none of those are able to happen. And the third line of defense is sandboxing, or isolating everything that they can. If they have everything in their own little compartments, then it's pretty much impossible for them to escape and potentially harm you. And so through these different ways, GrapheneOS is able to protect against a lot of different kinds of vulnerabilities. Another feature I think is really cool is USB-C port controls. You could leave it normal and just set it to on, or you could set it to only accept charging and not be capable of transferring data. Or there are other options in case you want something that's a bit more specific. Altogether, this is a great feature in case someone tries to plug your device into a computer, and you can basically make your device incapable of transferring any data. Now to talk about the other features. GrapheneOS uses Sandboxed Google Play, which we'll talk a lot about more later. And they support Android Auto, which is pretty unique in the way that they don't give it a lot of special privileges like it normally does. Next we have network permission toggles, which gets rid of all internet access for an app. And there's also sensor permission toggles, which removes all sensors from an app. And then we have storage scopes, which basically forces an app to only be able to look at specific files and folders that you give it permissions to. And then we have contact scopes, which makes an app only able to look at specific contacts. GrapheneOS also has per connection MAC randomization, which is a lot better than per network MAC randomization. And this basically helps you become less identifiable when connecting to a Wi-Fi connection. So I'd say that's pretty cool. They also have a feature that removes all EXIF data from screenshots, with the only thing really being left is what the OS is. Though if you want to, you could go into the settings and you can make it so that all the EXIF data is there, including your local date and time and whatnot. They also have a feature called clearing sensitive data from memory, and as it kind of sounds, they basically try to clear sensitive data from memory, and that's great in case of any kind of exploit that could take advantage of something that's in memory, so it's good to clear out as much as possible. They also extended the character limit of passwords from 16 all the way to 128, and so I don't know why you need a password that long, but GrapheneOS increased it by a factor of 8. They also have auto reboot, which is a good thing to have since whenever your device first powers on, it's in the most secure state that it can be in. And they have the timer set to 18 hours by default, but they do have set values that range from 10 minutes to 72 hours, or you could turn it off completely if you wanted to. But this is a good thing to have if you want to have your device be as secure as possible. I'd say duress pin is one of the most impressive features, as it irreversibly wipes your entire device. And it is worth noting that whenever you type in the password that wipes your device, it's not just for the unlock screen, it's for everywhere on the device, so you definitely do want to be careful to not type it in on accident. One of the most memorable features about GrapheneOS that you probably have heard everywhere if you've heard about GrapheneOS is their user profiles. Having profiles is great since each profile is basically considered a different device. And that's really helpful since you can separate different aspects of your life into each profile. And GrapheneOS has been working on a lot of ways to improve the user profiles to be even better. They have more profiles, making it go from 4 to 32. They have an end session button, which basically is logging out of the user profile completely. They let you disable app installations on specific profiles. They also let you transfer apps from one profile to another. They also have notification forwarding, so let's say that you have a work-specific profile and maybe you're waiting on a text from your boss or something, then you could get that while you're in your other profiles. So far, those are all the major improvements that GrapheneOS has made so far, but I assume in the future they definitely do a lot more in order to make it have more functionality. GrapheneOS also uses Seed Vault in order to make encrypted backups, so you can back up all your data if you need to. Improved VPN leak blocking is probably one of the most impressive features, as this tries to fix a lot of problems with VPNs. There's times where a VPN will be active, but it'll still send packets using your normal internet, or there's also chances where the VPN can be bypassed, or there's chances that the VPN will stop working and your device will still send requests using your normal internet. And GrapheneOS tries to get rid of all these issues so that your VPN actually works correctly. GrapheneOS also has a section called Other Features, which just goes over some features that don't need much explanation or just aren't very significant. And I just wanted to go over a handful that I thought were pretty useful. GrapheneOS has seamless automatic OS updates, so you can download updates and install them pretty easily. And they also have automatic rollbacks, so for whatever reason, if an update fails or is corrupted in some way, then it'll just roll back to the previous version and your device will be fine. They also added the ability for you to toggle wireless alerts, and this is alerts such as weather reports or Amber Alerts. This is mainly useful for Canadians since almost everything is an alert. At least from my experience talking to a lot of Canadians, they all say that they hate all the alerts that they get and they usually put their phone in do not disturb mode. And so this is a pretty good quality of life feature if you're a Canadian. Or if this is a thing that happens in another country, then it could be good for wherever you are. They also had call recording, and it also has no restrictions to it, so you definitely should follow whatever your laws are for your country or your area. But it is nice to have the ability to record your calls whenever you need to. And GrapheneOS automatically will enable always-on VPN and block connections without VPNs whenever you first use a VPN, so that's also nice to have. It is also worth noting that GrapheneOS constantly tries to send as much as they possibly can upstream to official Android, and so whenever they do actually get something pushed to Android, they'll immediately remove things from their website. And so in reality, they have done a lot more, but they only talk about the features that they exclusively have. And yes, this does mean that if you use Android or any sort of OS that's based on Android, then you should be thanking GrapheneOS for their service. And so the next thing to talk about is that they have a very in-depth FAQ section that goes over a lot. And I'm not trying to go through all of this, but I at least do want to touch on a handful of points that I think are worth mentioning. First, they have a section about what devices are recommended, and here they recommend a Pixel 8 or higher, mainly because of the fact that they have 7 years of support, and also they have hardware memory tagging. They also have a list of requirements for what devices they'll support. I know a lot of people do complain about the fact that GrapheneOS is only on Pixels, but this list is exactly why. It's the only thing that has high security and proper device hardware. Basically nothing else comes close. They also do have a chart here that shows all the devices that they support, how many years they get support for, and the date whenever they'll stop getting support. There's not really too much to talk about specifically, but it is a nice chart that they do have. And they also do have a section talking about if they're audited, and even though technically yes, there's no specific report to point to. I know a lot of people do wish that there was some kind of massive essay or something that was made by some group, but in reality, they've only been audited in different ways, but are still considered trustworthy, and it is technically audited. It's kind of hard to fully explain into words, but yes, they are audited. Now, as for the installation process, like everything involving GrapheneOS, it's very thorough, which is amazing. And in a lot of cases, it seems like there's a lot to read, but once you just break everything down, it's pretty much all really straightforward. And what makes it even better is that the installation process after doing the prerequisites is as straightforward as possible, as you literally just have to press 4 buttons. And what's even better is the fact that Side of Burritos made a video where he tried to brick GrapheneOS installation, and he failed in every way that he tried. And this is something that I think is very comforting, as if you're someone who's afraid of bricking their device, it's pretty much impossible. So GrapheneOS has you covered. And so going over the entire process, all you need to do is press unlock the bootloader, select your device, do a step on your phone to unlock the bootloader, and then you have to download the right image file, which it'll do automatically for you. And then you have to flash the image file, which will take a little bit. And then you have to relock bootloader, and you have to do so through your phone after you press the lock bootloader button. And then they also have verified boot key hashes, which is just a good way to check if your installation is an official GrapheneOS one. And altogether, the process took under 6 minutes, but I'd say that roughly a minute and a half was spent just on downloading the file. So depending on whether or not you include the download time, it took closer to like 4.5 minutes. So altogether, I'd say that this is a phenomenal process for installing any kind of operating system. I personally think it's probably the best out there. And now, even though I've been saying that this installation process is really good, I do have one small thing that I do want to point out that I personally don't like that much. And I do understand why people would disagree with me saying that this is a problem, and I would agree with those counter arguments that people would say, but I'm just saying something that I think could make this a little bit better. And so on a page like this right here, we have one step related to Linux, another step related to any kind of operating system, then a step right here related to Linux, a step right here related to Windows, and then another step related to all operating systems. Personally, I don't really think that this is as ideal as it should be. I think it would be nice if there was maybe some tabs that just said like Windows, Mac, Linux, Android, just making it all as straightforward as possible. And that's at least my personal opinion. And because of that, I would give it a 9 out of 10. It's not perfect, but I think that it is pretty much as good as it gets. I personally still really like it though. Now that I got the main complaint out of the way that I personally don't like, I also do want to mention 2 really small things that I personally just think could be a little bit better. And so first of all is this one line here where it says to use the high quality standards compliant USB-C cable packaged with the device. Now, I could be reading this wrong, and I'd love to know if that's the case, or it could be something to do with the fact that I got my device in America, but it almost sounds as if it's saying to use the cable that came with the box. And I bought a couple of Pixels at this point, and none of those cables work, so I don't know if maybe there's an issue on my end, but personally I don't really like this one line, and I think it could be slightly misleading. And another thing is the fact that it mentions Brave as a usable browser. Now, there's no issue with Brave. It's a good browser, and it is able to be used for installing GrapheneOS. But because of the shields, it kind of just causes problems for a lot of people. And I'm not saying to remove it, but maybe just add like a little note that says that it's not highly recommended, or something about it maybe causing issues. That's all I think that should be added. But otherwise, I think everything is perfectly fine. Now, as for the apps that come pre-installed on GrapheneOS, we have App Store, Auditor, Info, PDF Viewer, Vanadium. And that's really about it. They have a couple of stock apps just for basic device usage, but other than that, that's really all that they add themselves. As for the App Store app, this is mainly a repository for GrapheneOS's own apps, just so that they can update them and whatnot. But they also have a list of other apps that they have very high trust in. They also do have Sandboxed Google Play, of course, and on top of that, they also do include a Crescent. A Crescent is a privacy and security focused app store. You can kind of think of it as F-Droid, but much higher security. As of right now, a Crescent doesn't really have that many apps. I would say that right now it's only really good for organic maps, EXIF Eraser, App Verifier, Molly. Other than that, I mean, they have a couple of other apps, but I don't really think they're that big of a deal. At least thinking about the future, this is definitely an app that can improve and do a lot more that F-Droid doesn't. But as of right now, it's kind of in a weird situation. Now, as for Auditor, this could probably be its own separate video because of how many things it has in it, but at least to give a TLDR, it pretty much helps verify your OS and make sure that it's not tampered with in any way. And I don't think that this is an app that you'd really use every single day, but I think that it is pretty helpful to use here and there just to make sure your OS is not modified or anything. Now, as for info, it pretty much does what you'd expect. It's an app that gives you information related to GrapheneOS. For the most part, it mainly just has information related to the newest updates of GrapheneOS. And on top of that, they also do have a community tab where you can join their different chats, which are all bridged together. So if you join one of the chats, then you'd basically be able to talk on any of them. They also have their own forum, and they have their social media sites. And then they also have a donations page, and they also have a little section related to hiring in case you want to help work with GrapheneOS. Altogether, it's a pretty straightforward and simple app just to give people information. As for the PDF viewer, I'm going to be honest, I don't really use PDFs, so I don't really know what to say in this case. At best, I can point you towards what GrapheneOS says about it, which is that it's sandboxed, it's hardened, and it just does everything. Also, whenever you go into the app permissions, it has no permissions to anything. It doesn't connect to the network, it doesn't connect to your storage files. It's just its own little thing, and it doesn't really have access to any of your files. That's all I can really say about this. Whenever it comes to Vanadium, GrapheneOS themselves already have a ton of documentation related to it, but I at least want to make this section just to talk about some smaller points that people don't usually talk about. Vanadium does not support extensions, mainly because it conflicts with site isolation and anti-fingerprinting. And another thing is that extensions make modifications to the browser, which they also don't want. But they also do have their own version of content filtering, which is not really as good as something like uBlock Origin, but it at least does get the job done. They also do have a section talking about ad blocking apps, and they actually recommend that you use DNS-based content filtering, and I would say that's pretty much like using a VPN's DNS content blocking, or maybe just getting a custom DNS off the internet. And most of this does go back to the very first thing that they mention on their features list, being attack surface reduction, because the less that they add, the less of a chance there is that you could have anything bad happen. So I think that this is a fair trade-off in the end of the day. GrapheneOS also has a section talking about why they use a Chromium-based browser, not a Gecko-based browser or Firefox-based browser. They mainly talk about the fact that Chromium-based browsers have better security. I think some people have made arguments about Firefox being more private in a lot of ways, but whenever you compare privacy to security, the security is more worth having. It's also worth noting that Vanadium is GrapheneOS exclusive. The main reason for this is because Vanadium strips a lot of things that are already baked into the OS, so they removed a lot of the code since it was just unnecessary. And that pretty much covers Vanadium. It's a pretty complex browser, and I might at some point make a video dedicated to Vanadium and all the things that it does. But at least for now, I think that covers at least enough. Now, as for Sandboxed Google Play, it's pretty much like having normal Google Play services on your device, but with a compatibility layer that isolates it and treats it as a normal app. They kind of explain it a little bit here on their App Store app. And I also do want to play a section from a GrapheneOS developer interview. And here you could hear a GrapheneOS developer themselves talk about it. So I'm just going to play a little bit of that.
GrapheneOS has the Sandboxed Google Play Services feature. So, what does that mean? So it means you, the user, can install the real, untempered, untouched Google Play apps on your device, and they will run perfectly on the phone. Most of the APIs will work, almost all of them. And they don't get any special privileges. They run within the normal application sandbox, just like any other app. And the user is in full control of all the permissions they grant to it. So, how did we do it? Essentially, what we've done is within the operating system, we've put in shims. So, for those of you who might not be familiar with the terminology, you can think of a shim as rerouting a train, for example. So instead of going directly from A to B, where B might be some sort of privileged integration, you might instead redirect through station C, then go to B. Or you might go instead, you know what, let's just not go to station B at all, let's go to station D. And in order to reduce that abstraction down, it means instead of using a privileged API, we'll reroute Play services to using an API that normal apps can use, or we'll just feed it back dummy data. Play services, for example, on a stock operating system is allowed to get the serial number of the phone. And what we do is we just say, all right, cool. There's no serial number. And it doesn't get a serial number. Simple as that. And another thing that we do, like Play services on the stock operating system technically has access to the IMEI. And, it obviously can't do that because it doesn't have the deep system integration. It doesn't have the special permissions which the user can't control, which means that it can access the IMEI. And so it never gets that on GrapheneOS because it's running within the normal application sandbox and the user is in full control of what permissions it gets. It's impossible for it to access the IMEI. It's impossible for it to get access to all this deep system integration and monitor what you're doing on the phone.
And that's pretty much all that I want to play from this interview, but I also would recommend that you watch the interview for yourself, as there's a lot of different talking points that are all worth listening to. And this video did come out in mid-2022, so there's a chance that some of it is not perfect to right now, but it does talk a lot about GrapheneOS and all the things that they do. And next I do want to give a section talking about a very common dilemma, which is app compatibility. Even though people do want a private and or secure operating system, they don't really want to give up many apps. And so as for OSs that use microG, there are already lists and websites that talk about microG compatibility specifically. But as for GrapheneOS, they don't really have all that much. There's a small list here, and there is a list of banking apps that work. But outside of that, they don't really have much, mostly because they don't really need to. And even on the small chance that app doesn't work, they have a toggle known as Exploit Protection Compatibility Mode, which you can set for each individual app. And this will usually give more compatibility to any app. Though at the same time, there are very small cases, such as eBay, which doesn't work on microG or Sandboxed Google Play. But these are very small exceptions, and they are definitely not the rule. But here's the best part. If you don't like using Sandboxed Google Play, then you just don't have to use it. It doesn't come pre-installed, and even if you do need to use it for whatever reason, you can put it in one of the 32 profiles, or you can put it in a work profile or a private space, and altogether, it's just easier to use in pretty much every way, and I think that it does a much better job than microG does. Now as for one of my favorite examples, the comparison chart for Android-based operating systems. In terms of freedom, features, and de-Googling, GrapheneOS seems to pass all of them, all except for Google Pay compatibility. GrapheneOS also seems to perfectly pass Google Play services and privacy. And then once again, they pass everything in security. Now here's a full view of all of the OSs and all of the features mentioned. And you can see that GrapheneOS seems to do quite a lot better than the rest. And so then this actually made me think, what if I highlight every feature where GrapheneOS is the only one to do something, or is the only one to do something better than everyone else? And this is what I got. Since this felt a little bit unfair, I decided to highlight every two that were the best at something, and I got this. And it seems that GrapheneOS does everything a lot better, And I think that this shows in a good visual representation how much better GrapheneOS is compared to the others. Alright, so I'm doing this part while editing the video, and I just wanted to mention that the chart does often update, so here's what it looks like now. Pretty much everything that I said still stands. GrapheneOS still does everything significantly better, but here's what it looks like now. I just want to make sure that's clear. That's pretty much it. Everything is still accurate. And now to talk about device support. Pixel 9 released on August 22nd. The very next day, GrapheneOS already released an experimental version. The day after, they added it to their staging site, and they did mention a few problems, but nothing crazy. And then in the 2024-08-31 release, they added Pixel 9 for the first time. And here's how the naming system works. It's basically just year, month, day. And so this tells us that they released it on August 31st. And if that doesn't do good enough for you, GrapheneOS did reply to somebody, literally saying that Pixel 9 support is fully functional and stable on September 3rd. With all odds stacked against them, that means that at most, it took less than 2 weeks. As for CalyxOS, the best I could find is the November 2024 security update mentioning Pixel 9 will be released this week. In the LineageOS changelog 29, that's the first time that Pixel 9 was shown. And for EOS, the timeline is a little bit weird. Searching it up said that it was on May 16th, but I couldn't really find it until July 20th on the Wayback Machine. Unfortunately, the site was only saved on the 9th and the 20th of July, so I can't really find an exact day. But from all the information I could find, GrapheneOS took less than 2 weeks, CalyxOS took 3 months, LineageOS took 4 months, and EOS took somewhere between 9 and 11 months. For Android releases, Android 15 released on October 15th, and GrapheneOS was already prepared the same day. 6 days later, they already released Android 15. For Android 16, that released on June 10th, and it took up until July 7th because of the new things that Android did that just made it harder. And keep in mind that this thing made the Calyx founder and the CalyxOS tech lead both quit. Pixel 10 is another issue as it requires Android 16 QPR1, which seems to just not be releasing. And it also does not help that GrapheneOS currently has a lead developer which is conscripted into the Ukrainian army. And even though they did lose a lead developer, they would have still had it released in like 2 weeks, I would assume, if it wasn't for the fact that QPR1 is just not releasing. I don't understand why. Alright, so now that I think I've covered pretty much everything that I can, it's time to talk about my experience. And I mainly want to talk about 6 points that I think are the most important. Starting off with number 1 being usability. GrapheneOS looks and feels almost exactly like stock Android does. And on top of this, you can install apps the same way, and you could even install APK files. So in pretty much every way possible, it looks and feels exactly like an Android phone. There's almost no chance that you can show GrapheneOS to somebody and they won't know what they're doing. In terms of battery life, I usually use a profile that has Sandboxed Google Play installed, and I also use my SIM card 24/7, and I also don't charge my phone at night, so I usually wake up with about 20%. I can usually get through the day with about 2 fairly short charges. Also worth noting that I very often do like to listen to music and sometimes watch videos. And I also do a little bit of light gaming, but nothing really crazy. In terms of app compatibility, most apps usually work fine. There are of course some government apps, restaurant apps, shopping apps, and even banks that don't really work properly, or some will work if you use exploit protection compatibility mode. For me, I personally needed to use exploit protection compatibility mode for visual voicemail and for my smartwatch. Other than that, I haven't really had any issues with any apps that I've ever personally wanted. In terms of drawbacks, you do lose features such as at a glance, now playing, search bar, smart select, quick tap, Google Pay, and plenty of other features that are exclusive to Pixel. Though at the same time you do still get the Pixel camera and all of the features that the Pixel camera has and the quality. And you also get to use Google Photos, and you can still use things like Magic Erase. But you still do lose a lot of the features that are simply impossible to install on GrapheneOS. But as for benefits, I mean, you could pretty much just go and rewatch the section about the features. GrapheneOS has a lot of features that they put a lot of time and effort into. In terms of maintenance and also asking for help or questions, GrapheneOS usually updates once within 2 weeks. There are plenty of examples of GrapheneOS releasing a new update the day after they already release an update, or like 2 or 3 days after they release an update. But they usually will release at least one update within every 2 weeks. And in terms of asking for help or asking questions, GrapheneOS developers are very active on places like Twitter and Blue Sky and the GrapheneOS discussion forums. And on top of that, they also have many community members that are also able to help and answer any questions if they're ever needed. So altogether in daily life, you don't really lose that much, and you can even gain battery life out of it. And most of the features that you miss out on are usually things that you can get back through other means. So altogether, I would say that there's no legitimate downsides towards having GrapheneOS. Now for my final thoughts. GrapheneOS looks and feels exactly like Android does, and you could even use Android apps and basically use the phone completely normal. And it even has the Google Play Store, so you're even installing apps basically exactly how you would any other device. It also comes pre-installed with so few apps to the point where you could pretty much treat it as a dumb phone if you really wanted to. Unlike a lot of the other OSs who try to sell you things, GrapheneOS is 100% free, and all that they ask for is for donations. GrapheneOS is also extremely easy to install, as all you have to do is read a little bit and press 4 buttons on your browser. And they also do provide command line if that's something that you want. And they even have different places to talk in case you need to ask for help. And it's almost impossible to brick GrapheneOS. On top of this, GrapheneOS has the highest hardware standards, privacy and security standards, and they always try to push out updates as fast as they can. Because of all the work that they put in, they even go as far as to make Edward Snowden impressed. So altogether, GrapheneOS is an amazing project, and I think that there is nothing like GrapheneOS out there.